A guten Erev Shabbos. It's fair to say at this point, we do not always know what's coming next. It's also fair to say at this point that it's usually a mixed bag. Those might be some of the kindest things that we can say about the calendar year that's just coming to a close. Is there any inspiration to be found in this week's Torah portion if, as some of the commentators have mentioned, the key word, the initial word, Vayechi, he lived. In the opening verse, Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim shva'asrei shana, Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. Vahi yemei Yaakov shnei chayev. These were the days of Yaakov's life, the best times of his life. Short answer, yes. Yaakov lived these years abroad, in Egypt for goodness sakes. Not the land of his birth, not the land of his ancestors, not the land that God had promised his descendants as an eternal heritage. Egypt, a foreign culture. We'll learn more about Egypt in the weeks to come. In the Parsha is yet ahead of us. It was a very materialistic culture, gold and wealth and riches, pyramids, statues, polytheism. There was a cult of the Pharaoh. There was a cult of the afterlife. The country itself, the economy was built on slavery. And it was a world superpower at the time, which, almost as a rule, corrupts society. Even after centuries of slavery, when we were redeemed from captivity and making our way through the desert on the way to Israel, the Jewish people were still chalishing for the flesh pots of Egypt. Remember how good the food was, we said. Physicality had a very powerful grip on us then, as it does now. It's also a very good question how we can describe these times as the best of Yaakov's life when he was, in fact, dying. That's what this Parsha talks about, the process of Jacob's leaving this world, and it's called Vayechi, he lived. Bit of an irony, at least a paradox, on par with Parshas Chayesara, if you recall from some weeks ago. The fact of the matter is, Yaakov did have peace of mind and tranquility in this period of his life, really for the first time ever. If you do the math, if you look back over his whole life, you'll remember he had a very tough childhood with Esav wanting to kill him. He fled with nothing in his pockets, only stones for his pillow, as he dreamed of angels. And he wound up working for 20 years for the dishonest Lavan. Then, after that, Esav came after him with his minions to finally get his revenge. Yaakov wrestled with an angel. He was permanently injured. There was the incident with Dinah's abduction and his son's vengeance. Then his most precious child vanished for 22 years, and he never found comfort or consolation. It was not an easy life that Yaakov had. Nor ultimately was it a good thing for his descendants. Yaakov and Yosef both expire by the end of this week's Parsha, and spoiler alert, by the beginning of next week's Sedra, Shemos. The entire book of Exodus, a new Pharaoh had arisen over Egypt and forgot the entire history of Yosef's leadership and guidance through the years of famine. And that Pharaoh proceeded to enslave the Hebrew people. Okay, fact is, we saw this coming. It was really a fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham in the covenant of the parts earlier in the book of Genesis and Chumash Bereshis. You should know that your descendants will be enslaved in a land that's not theirs, and so on. This descent into Egypt, which on the face of it was joyous. Here's Yaakov and his whole family, 70 souls in all, going to Egypt for a family reunion. Everyone's so excited to be together again with all their loved ones. It's also, in that happiness, the beginning of a very bitter chapter in our history. So here he was in Egypt, Yaakov, in this foreign land with a culture opposed to what Judaism stands for. And we say it was the best years of his life. Well, he was finally together with everyone, and he did have a certain degree of peace of mind. He did enjoy that time that he had there. You'll notice he's called Yaakov here throughout this Parsha, rather than the new name Yisrael that he was given recently, because he never endeavored to steer the whole clan back to the land of Israel. A little Zionism for you there in the Chumash. The Sfas Emes asks how Yaakov could feel the chayim, the chayas, the liveliness, vitality, joie de vivre, that's my words, not his, in such a place as Egypt. His reflection is that since Yaakov's outstanding quality is truth, emes, That was the touchstone that kept him centered. Parentheses on Motzei Shabbos. We've been getting together on Zoom for a beautiful musical Havdalah. Everyone's welcome to join us for that. And one of the songs that we sing there is Al Tira Avdi Yaakov. Don't fear Yaakov, my servant, which is an alphabetical string of verses, psukim, from across Tanakh that reference Yaakov. The last one is with a tav, end of the alphabet, is Titein Emes LeYaakov. God gives truth to Yaakov. That's a quote from the prophet Micha. Truth was Yaakov's touchstone, so he was able flawlessly to distinguish between what was true and what was not, what was real and enduring and what was temporary and fleeting, what was godly and what was not, or even opposed to godliness. This applied in his life and in his sojourn in Egypt, these 17 years toward the end of his life. He was able to see past the one-time enmity of his children, among his children, and appreciate that God brought them all together for the last years of his life. Moreover, as all the commentaries insist, Goshen was where they lived. It was a center of Jewish life, yeshivas, Torah learning. That was also the Titein Emes LeYaakov that sustained him and them through these times. We're his children, we're his heirs, so we have that ability to tap into it as well. Nesivos Shalom describes a deeper view of this era in our history, writing that the responsibility of Bnei Yisrael at this juncture in our people's history was to identify and to focus on as much of the holiness as they could, even though it was Egypt, even though they were under Paro. There's a theory of the sparks of holiness in the spiritual worldview, meaning the entire world contains elements of holiness that a Jew has the opportunity to seek out and bring to light and celebrate, no matter where he or she is, in any and all situations. There is some holiness to be found there. There's something good that can be brought out of it. In fact, says Nesivos Shalom, this is the very legacy that Yaakov bequeaths to us, to be able to find good, to do our best, to make something good come out of whatever situation we're in. So think about our present state of exile. Okay, we don't live in Israel, and it's not the time of redemption yet. There's still strife in the world. There's still sickness, there's suffering, there's injustice. We've seen that all around us very clearly and obviously in these past few months. And all that has occasioned a further stage of exile in the lives of each and every one of us. What's our matzav? What's our situation? Whatever was happening in the world around us, whatever was happening to us, we always had our kehilas, our shuls, our communities as a refuge, our little land of Goshen, our safe spot, our safe place in the world. We had one another. We would come together once a week for sure, some of us even on a daily basis, to daven together, proclaim God's name as holy and exalted together, and delve into Torah and its truth together. Now what? Even that's been suspended. 1 week we're open with barely a minyan. The next week we're closed. Another week we're open but without a minyan. Very unsettling, very confusing. We're not able to see family. This last year's Pesach will go down in history, hopefully, as in the annals of loneliness and isolation. Hopefully we'll never see another one like that again. We're even barred from entering the land of our people. You can't even get on a flight to Florida. What are we supposed to do? What do we do? We're taught by and inspired and empowered by the example of Yaakov. We do the best we can, the best we possibly can. We make something good come out of it. That's been the theme of our whole year. We learn, we grow, we find new ways. Even though we don't know what's coming next, we do the very best we can. Davening at home, davening in shul when it's possible, learning online, learning the parsha on our own, learning with someone else in the house, on the phone, on Zoom. It's a very mixed bag. It's safe at home. It's also sometimes a little monotonous at home, especially after the 10th month. It's a mixed bag. There's a vaccine, but not yet, not for you yet, but sometime. Maybe sooner, we don't know yet. Eventually, we will come back to minyan, we'll come back to shul, we'll have a kiddush again. And we ask ourselves, what have we done in the meantime? Have we done good things? We've wrapped ourselves up in prayer, really engaged in a new way with our siddur or our machzor on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, davened in a new way, connect, poured out our hearts and souls. We recite blessings and we ask for blessings. That, in fact, is a major theme of this concluding parsha of Chumash Bereshis, the last parsha, the end of Book of Genesis on this Shabbos Chazak. For those of us who were in Shul this Shabbat, we'll say Chazak, Chazak when we finish reading the Book of Genesis. As Churchill might have said, if he had come to Shul on Shabbos Chazak, it isn't the beginning of the end, but it is the end of the beginning. As Yaakov's children surround him, as his life draws to a close, Yaakov says to them, Hey asfu v'agida lechem, gather together, and I'll tell you what's going to happen in the end of days. I'll tell you how this all works out. Kabtzu v'shimu b'nei Yaakov sari, v'shimu el Yisrael avichem. Come together and listen, children of Jacob. Listen to your father Yisrael. The Gemara in Pesachim records what all the children answered. They said, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, God is our God, God is one. And their father was so moved by this, he responded, Baruch Shem Kvod Malchusa La'olam Va'ed. Blessed is the name of God's kingdom's glory forever and ever. That response is not recorded in the Torah, by the way. Baruch Shem is not a biblical text. So later on, when the Chachamim put together our Siddur, they weren't sure, should we include it, should we not include it? They didn't want to ignore it. But since Moshe Rabbeinu didn't write it in the Torah, they didn't want to add something that wasn't there originally. So what was the compromise? They included it, but we say it in a whisper, in an undertone, only on Yom Kippur. When anyway we rise to the level of malachim, of angels, then do we say it out loud. So what comes after this? Only blessings, only brachas. Each of the Shvatim receives a bracha from Yaakov, custom built to their own personality and their own individual tribal clan's destiny. So this Shabbos, when you look over the parsha, look closely at those brachas and their commentaries. Binyamin ze'ev yitrov. Benjamin is like a wolf. He gathers in all the goodness from among the nations and assimilates all that into Israel, explains Mei Shiloach. Who also explains Naftali ayelas shalucha, hanoisen imrei shefer. Naftali is a gazelle, dispatched gazelle who delivers beautiful sayings, meaning is able to see through the mundane to the central question, the central issue of godliness at the core of everything, and inspire thankfulness. His prayers sound sweet as honey. His songs will be the most beautiful and inspiring. Also sweet is Yehuda's bracha. Kibeis beyayin levusha. He'll wash his clothes in wine. Now at our house, we launder the clothes to get the wine stains out, but here you have the other way. The bracha here hints to the plentiful wine of the land of Israel, which we still see even today, of course. And on a deeper level, wine is taste and goodness and sweetness. That's a bracha and an inspiration to us when we learn Torah, that it should always be sweet and satisfying. It launders our garments, our soul's garments of thought, speech, and action, that they should become permeated with the sweetness of the insights we gain from our learning. When you look through this last passage before the Parsha and the entire book of Genesis conclude, you'll see it's a mixed bag. You don't know quite what's coming next. It takes some time to appreciate the fullness of the blessings and see how they apply to the life of the Jewish people that's to follow. No different at all, I'll suggest to you, than our current moment. It seems like a mixed bag, and no one is quite sure what comes next. Still, we understand where it all comes from and what it's ultimately destined to be, all blessings, all brachas, if we let it be. Good Shabbos.